Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Nystrom. I'm with the Appraisal Institute, based out of the United States. We're in 91 countries. We have about 25,000 real estate appraisers. And how do we get this online? Ah, there you go. Good. Okay, now my paper is actually on the real estate and its relation to the financial crisis. It's not directly, it's indirectly related to transparency. So last night I thought of a couple comments regarding transparency. I'll just start off with that, and then we'll move into the basic presentation. Obviously, transparency decreases risk and increases values. We all kind of intuitively know that. But how much transparency do we need? Obviously, transparency has a cost. Most people don't think about the level of transparency. We just think, okay, transparency is a good thing. We either have enough or we don't have enough, and it's just very qualitative. So one of the things I want to make people think about a little bit is how much transparency is appropriate and how much is attainable in a given market. Don't just sort of skip over that. To sort of frame that thought process, I want to start with how we can measure transparency. And this is it's very difficult to do. One of the reasons why we look at transparency in a very qualitative manner is because it's very difficult to measure. For commercial real estate, you can look at transparency based upon risk levels. A lower cap rate, a lower discount rate means lower risk, higher values. So a good measure, a reasonable measure of transparency can be analyzed by looking at the effect it has on cap and discount rates. In residential markets, you don't look at them from an income standpoint, so you can't really do it that way. But you can look at mortgage rates. If the risk is lower to a lending institution, in theory, there's a lower risk to the asset itself. Maybe it's a lower loan-to-value ratio or something like that. So that's one way, a couple of ways you can look at transparency or the effect that increased transparency has on a market. Now, why? That's kind of how, but why does transparency decrease risk? In general, obviously, there's more information available to all the principal parties, normal buyers and sellers, normal lenders. So all the normal actors can make more prudent decisions, so there's lower risk. Risk is the enemy. Obviously, we're trying to make the real estate markets more efficient, more prosperous. Anytime we can remove risk, we're making the markets more efficient. So all the normal actors will have more information. They'll be able to make more prudent decisions. But there's a whole other layer to that that's often missed. The increased transparency can open the market to a whole new range of actors, a whole new range of buyers, a whole new range of lenders. And that actually magnifies the benefit. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, a little bit of transparency won't do that. A little bit of transparency will just make the markets a little more efficient for the principal players. But at some point, it breaks free, and all of a sudden, international capital will be interested in that market. And a much larger benefit will be seen. So I guess the key is to look at how we can increase transparency to the point where it breaks the plane, where it goes to another level of productivity, bringing in new lenders, new buyers and sellers. So, and that's probably a good measure of the efficient point, when you can go to that next level. Now on to my presentation on the real estate and the financial crisis. This is a much longer presentation. It's 30 or 40 minutes long normally, so I'm going to have to skip about over half of it. The paper was finished on January 29th, the draft went out. If anybody wants a copy, just get me a card later. They do have a copy of it here as well. The PowerPoint you're about to see was actually updated into April, so I got into the first quarter information on the PowerPoint presentation. The main focus of this paper is analyzing, trying to give an idea when we're going to hit the bottom of this current financial crash. When we're going to hit the bottom, how long it will take to get there for all of the major factors of the crash. It also gets into the capital markets and the financing and optimal solutions for the credit markets, but that's the part we're going to skip. You'll have to read the paper for that. Sorry about that. If I had more time. There's a joke on the streets of Moscow these days. Everything the communists told us about communism was a complete and utter lie. Unfortunately, Everything the communists told us about capitalism turned out to be true. As we found out in the last, 6, 8 months, we're not quite as smart in the West as we thought we were. I guess there's really no reason to assume that we have avoided the down cycles in the real estate market. And obviously, it's very likely that even if, as we get smarter and better and have more efficient markets, we'll still probably have down cycles. We can hope that they're more mild in the future. This first section is on the financial markets. As I said, I really can't spend too much time on it. The bottom line on the financial markets, there are several, the world has kind of worked together to solve our financial crisis, which is which is an amazing thing, actually. I don't think the major international banks have ever, in the past, had a financial crisis that scoped the entire world, nor do I think they have ever really cooperated to the level that they have this time. All of our economies will prosper and recover from this crash much faster because of the cooperation of the world banks. They all moved, most of the world banks moved together and moved quickly and strongly, and that's going to help us. The bottom line, though, is that the financial markets are still sputtering, and as long as capital is sputtering out and coming slowly in coughs and sputters, our economic systems, our real estate markets are also going to sputter. So getting the capital markets flowing again is the first step to our recovery. If we don't do that, we're going to struggle for a long time to come. So first step is saving the capital markets. The next thing I looked at is something that demographers look at all the time, population, age studies. Most economists, most finance people ignore the age of populations. They ignore the effect in general of an aging population, increased cost of social services. What effect will that have on the economy? And one of the things I expected to see, now this paper is going to look, because the United States sort of led the world into the current crash, I kind of focus on the United States, or I'll give the discussion on the general topic, and then I'll show you where the United States is. Because when the United States starts coming out of the crash, we can all hope that it'll start pulling the world with it. What I expected to find was that the United States, after World War II, would have a very aging population, and that we would be facing a decrease in our workforce and potentially high social services costs. What I found is it's not as bad as I was expecting. The United States has an average age of 36.7. You'll see most of the World War II countries have the highest average ages or median ages. Germany, Japan, Italy at 45, and you can see the others at 42 and 40. Basically, a lot of the World War II countries. But the U.S., however, has a fairly young, 36.7, significantly younger. So not as big of a problem. Hence, now I didn't get into a full age curve study, which would show where the population bubble is moving, if you follow me. So some of these countries may be improving, and some of them are not improving, i.e. the average age or median age is getting older. You can see I also wanted to look at populations over the age of 60 to get an idea which countries are actually paying very high social services costs right now. And you can see it's pretty much the same countries. Okay, this is sort of a summary of where we're going, but I'll just take you right to the points individually. Reinhart and Rogoff, a University of Maryland and a Harvard University professor, did a study looking at 18 crashes around the 18 biggest financial crashes around the world that we had data for. I've expanded that study, added sectors on the financial markets, added the age study and some other parts, and I've built around that. The concept here was we were looking at how deep the crash is going to be. Based on these 18 crashes around the world, how deep, if we're equal to the average, how deep will this crash be? How long will it take to get there? And I do apologize if it's small. Normally my screen is much bigger than this. Okay, this first section here is on real estate values. This side over here of the chart, and I'm going to use my laser on this one. You can see the other ones if they're closer to you. This side here is showing you, well, these are the individual countries, and it gives you the year that they fell into their crash. This side over here is the magnitude, the percentage change in their decline in their real estate. And the white lines actually were current effects as of the end January, I believe, January of 09. And over here is how many years it took them to get to the bottom. Okay? Now, I'll have charts for all the factors like that. Now, we have, on average, of all these crashes, we had a 35.5% decline in real estate prices, and it took 5 to 6 years to get to the bottom. 5 years if you exclude Japan, 6 years if you include Japan. Japan took 17 years. Nobody wants to learn from Japan's example. It was a very bad example. We're trying to learn how not to do that. Japan essentially left much of the bad assets within their banking system, which essentially messed up their banking system for a long time to come, greatly leading to this whole 17-year period that it took for them to recover. So 35.5% down and 5 to 6 years to get there. The United States is 21% down as of March 2009. The surveys vary slightly, but that's based upon National Association of Realtor data. So realistically, I think people from outside the U.S. actually have assumed that the fall was a lot worse than that. But, I mean, those are real numbers. So much less, I think, than a lot of people expected. This is the National Association of Realtor data. They're everywhere in the United States. So, I mean, if you could scroll in on this, you'd see all the many millions of transactions that make this up. Here's another graphical way of looking at the real estate crash. In 2006, we hit our peak. That's this line here. And the 21% drop takes us to the edge of the map there. Equity prices, stocks, bonds, related instruments. Once again, it's the same format in the main body of the chart. 55.9% drop. It took 3.4 years for the market to hit the bottom. Now, one of the whole goals of this is so that we can forecast how long it will be for us to get out of this crash. So, 55.9% drop, 3.4 years to hit the bottom. It's much less inertial than real estate is. Stocks move much faster, they fall harder, but they recover faster. Real estate is, in a lot of ways, real estate is a more stable instrument. The United States is down about 40%. So we're most of the way down to that 55.9. We're about I went back and saw when we started the crash, we're about 18 months or so into that down cycle, maybe 19 months now. It's been about a month since I put this together. So a month and a half. As you can see, however, for the last several months, the edge of the graph, you'll see the stock markets have stabilized. So that is certainly a very positive sign. The last several months, there have not been continued declines, suggesting that maybe we're at or near the bottom. One positive look at things. We're also, if we go back, we're about the same period we were in 2002, 2003. Okay, the next major factor we looked at was unemployment. Unemployment, on average, of all the other crashes, goes up by 7%. It takes 4.8 years to get to the bottom. Currently, the unemployment rate in the United States is 8.5%, and based on that 7% potential increase, we're probably going to be at 11.5% to 12% before we hit our peak on unemployment. Now, unfortunately, even though equity prices, and later I'll show you that real estate prices have stabilized, actually real estate transactions in the U.S., prices in the last couple of months have gone up. Amount of transactions in many states in the country have increased, suggesting that things have stabilized or are even getting better. Unfortunately, unemployment is still falling, or unemployment is increasing. So that's, maybe we have some more to go, and there is some argument that we have another small, hopefully small, dip in real estate prices and equity coming as soon as a lot of the balloon mortgages settle in. GDP. Looking at all the past crashes, GDP drops by about 9.3% on average. The interesting thing about this is it takes only 1.9 years for GDP to hit its bottom. If you're looking for a turning point indicator, it looks like GDP is the first thing that's going to recover. So I guess my suggestion to you is if your country is in a crash, or if you're watching the United States to see its turning point, watch GDP. When GDP turns the corner, very likely within 0 to 2 or 3 years after that, 0 to 2 years for most factors. I went back and looked at each of the countries. 0 to 2 years after GDP begins to recover, upturns, the other factors start to upturn as well. So that's your turning point indicator in all likelihood. Now, the 9.3% increase or decrease in GDP. Typically speaking, emerging economies have a larger decrease in GDP. The argument being that capital flees these emerging economies, international capital flees them. So they get hit harder on GDP. Unemployment, however, emerging economies do not get hit as hard on unemployment because, well, typically speaking, they don't have the social services, so people must work. If they're out of a job in a Western country, they may have unemployment benefits or something else, or family with money, some way to take care of themselves. So one thing to expect is that both unemployment and GDP will vary whether you're in a emerging economy or in a Western economy or a first world economy. Okay. One of the things I wanted to look at was to compare GDP to income and GDP to inflation and GDP to changes in housing prices. Here's the idea. Everyone expected there was this huge bubble in the United States, that housing prices shot up, that income levels didn't increase as much, or that production in the country didn't increase as much as housing prices did, that there's this big bubble. And that's what I expected too when I started looking at the data, but that's not what I found. What I found was there was about a 10% spread between increases in housing prices versus gross domestic product of the country. I found that between looking at inflation, consumer price index, and GDP, there was about a 10% difference there as well. And that looking at income, that income actually grew 5% faster than inflation, than CPI over the same period. What I found was that there wasn't as big of a spread between housing prices and income as people feared. Maybe a lot of the problem actually is psychology and fear. Once the markets stabilize, psychology and fear issues will go away. As we all know, the world is afraid of the crisis. Part of our problem, part of the reason the credit markets aren't working is fear. That aspect can bleed away much faster than the real root problems. So that's a positive turn point. This just shows gross domestic product. I'll skip past it a little bit, but really it was only the last 2 quarters of 2008 that we had a downturn. First 2 quarters of 2008 was positive. These are forecasts for countries around the world, but we'll skip that for now. I don't really believe the forecasts too much anyway. The last thing I want to leave you with is government debt. On average, government debt increases by 86.6% over the 3 years following the crisis. The increase in government debt, and that's the average of those other crashes around the world. The increase in government debt, however, is not what you'd expect. The increase in government debt is not typically because of the cost of the bailout. The increase in government debt is primarily due to decreases in tax revenue. As people's income goes down, there's less income taxes. The government's appetite for spending hasn't changed, doesn't change very quickly. Real estate taxes are down because values are down. All the sources of revenue for the government decrease, but their spending is still there. So a huge increase in government debt is to be expected in countries that are under heavy crisis. Of course, not every country in the world that's facing the problem is in this level of crisis. Some are just mildly in recession, and others are, like the United States, have taken a hit pretty hard. And this is just showing you that this is where the government debt information came from. It's very hard to read, but this is the increase in government debt in the U.S. It does look like we're on track, approximately around that 3 years to get up to 86.6, maybe a little less. But we pretty much are tracking that trend so far. And that's basically it. Thank you very much, everyone.